From LPM,
Louisville Public Media.
Welcome to On Track. I'm Aisha Jaffer. In Kentucky, college basketball isn't just a sport, it's a way of life. With March Madness and the NCAA Division I basketball tournaments fast approaching, the game's biggest stage will not only showcase top-tier talent, but also highlight the major shifts reshaping college athletics. From new financial dynamics to the evolving power structure, the landscape of college sports is changing rapidly. But what do these changes mean for the future of the game? To break it all down, we're joined by Armen Keteyian, an Emmy-winning journalist and New York Times bestselling author. With decades of experience covering the sports industry, Armen has written for Sports Illustrated, led video production at The Athletic, and reported for CBS Sports. His latest book, The Price: What It Takes to Win in College Football's Era of Chaos, explores the shifting world of college athletics. And today, he brings that expertise to college hoops and beyond. Armen, thanks for being here.
You're welcome, Aisha.
So the Division I college basketball tournaments are huge events that capture nationwide attention, even beyond regular sports fans. How would you describe their significance for those who might not be familiar?
Well, they call it March Madness for a reason. I mean, there's 3 weeks of just wall-to-wall basketball coverage. And if you understand the economics of the NCAA makes virtually no money off of college football. The $1 billion a year that comes into their coffers from CBS Sports and Turner Sports is basically built around those 3 weeks of March Madness and the Final Four. So it's an enormous economic engine for college athletics. I covered 7 Final Fours for CBS on the floor as a sideline reporter. To me, it's always been the most intoxicating, exciting, adrenaline-fueled event for so many different reasons. I would do one basketball game, like a Final Four, the championship game, I'd do one of those. The first weekend that you do March Madness, you do 4 games in one day from television. It's just complete, it's chaos, controlled chaos, but still chaos. So it's a great event. Obviously now with legalized sports gambling in America, it's gotten even bigger. Mm-hmm. I can't imagine what the betting numbers are going to be this year. But it's a seminal event in not just college sports, but sports overall.
So college sports as a whole, though, have been going through some major shifts. Before we dive into some of the more recent changes, could you kind of speak about how you've seen college sports landscape change since you first started reporting?
Well, I was at Sports Illustrated back in 1982, and probably by the time I was there for 2 or 3 years, I actually went to Mission, Kansas, and met Walter Byers, who was then the president or the executive director of the NCAA. They wasn't even called presidents at that time. And it was literally like you were in Kansas, but it was like going to Oz. I mean, it was a strange experience to walk into those offices. And at the end of the day, everybody, before they walked out the door, had to clear their desk. You couldn't have pictures. You couldn't have paper. It was like walking into a I don't know. It was like walking into Alice in Wonderland almost, or Oz, and that kind of a thing. And at that time, the NCAA was, making millions of dollars a year on college football and college basketball. You're now talking about $1 billion a year franchise, an association. So the changes over the last, 50 years. I mean, Walter Byers was the executive director of the NCAA for 36 years, and he ran it like a third world despot. I mean, it was his kingdom. And then as time went on, you had Seth Dempsey and you had Dick Schultz and you had others that came in to try to alter the landscape for the betterment of the athletes in some cases. But in the end, until these most recent landmark legal decisions, going back to the Ed O'Bannon case, and I'm sure we'll talk about that, Aisha, but it was delay and deny for the NCAA, and the labor force was a subjugated class run by, and it's not my word, but the court's word, a cartel. And we are now living in, as you alluded to, we are living in a very, very different world right now. A lot of people have called it the Wild Wild West. John Talty and I called it chaos, and that's exactly what it is.
Yeah. Well, I think it's important. We were talking about the NCAA, National Collegiate Athletic Association, and it's been shaping college sports and enforcing its rules. Now, University of Louisville fans might remember back in 2017, like we were talking about, the NCAA vacated the school's 2013 championship in men's basketball. So kind of going to basics on that, like for those who might not really know the details of the NCAA, how much influence does it have on creating rules and enforcing punishments like these?
Well, if you were talking 3 years ago, I would say 4 years ago, they had enormous weight. But as time has gone on, and you can go back into maybe 10 years ago, where Tom Mars, who's a big character in the book The Price, who took on the NCAA. He's formerly the head of general counsel for Walmart, a brilliant lawyer out of Arkansas, but started to tangle with the NCAA over eligibility and waiver cases and started to win those cases in court, meaning for your audience, in prior years, you had to sit out a year before you could transfer to another school in order to be eligible to play. Well, Tom challenged that time and time again and won in court. And that was the beginning of the crumbling of sort of the brick wall, the Berlin Wall to a certain case with the NCAA, and then the enforcement staff. And I know John Duncan very well, who runs the NCAA enforcement division. I think he's a very decent, well-thinking, disciplined, devoted person. But they're dealing with anachronisms right now. They're dealing with rules that really don't apply. And the ones that, people have laughed at over the years was like, for a while you could have a bagel, but you couldn't have cream cheese on the bagel. That was considered to be an extra benefit. It's ludicrous and laughable now, given what's going on in NIL. But for the longest time, it was the NCAA's way or the highway. The enforcement division and the Committee on Infractions were judge and jury. And when those decisions came down, you took your punishment and moved on. I mean, there were really very, very few options for appeal. Now, you go back to the O'Bannon case and what Sonny Vaccaro did in 2007 when he convinced Ed O'Bannon to become the lead plaintiff. And again, for your audience, Ed O'Bannon, 1995, won a national championship at UCLA. He was an All-American. He's in the Hall of Fame at UCLA, played professional basketball. Turned out to be just the perfect lead plaintiff in that case. And then Sonny was able to convince Michael Hausfeld, who's a legendary litigator out of Washington, D.C. in the antitrust matters, to take the case on. And that was really the beginning of the end for how the NCAA as we now know it and how it was structured, because it took 7 years, but by the time Judge Wilkin in the 9th District in Northern California ruled in favor of O'Bannon, and then you had two other critical cases, the Alston case and the House case. And the House case in 2021, when the Supreme Court ruled 9-0. When's the last time the Supreme Court agreed unanimously on anything that the NCAA had violated the Sherman Antitrust Act going back into the late 1900s, 1850, I think it was, and that this was a subjugated class that had been systematically withheld wages. When that door blew open, that was the beginning of NIL, and that was the beginning of the Wild Wild West we now see. And whatever happened at Louisville when Coach Pitino was there, and the transgressions, the laws that were broken, I mean, I hate to say it, those were sort of quaint compared to what was happening behind the scenes in the SEC, particularly in football, and now the above board money that's being passed. You have now NIL deals, single NIL deals, that are approaching $8 million a year for a quarterback, a valued commodity for a team that has a shot at winning a national championship. those numbers are astonishing right now. And that's just one case of one player, but I could name 100 where there's $1 million deals going on right now.
Yeah, I want to dive deeper into some of these changes you're talking about. Like you said, 2021, the NCAA introduced the policy allowing these student athletes to get profit from their name with name, image, likeness, NIL.
Well, Aisha, they didn't introduce it. It was forced on them by the courts.
Right.
Big difference.
Right, and that sort of led to that major change. Were there other factors that pushed them to adopt it on top of that case?
Well, they had no choice. I mean, they had been beaten to death in the courts. And for years and years, as I said, it was delay and deny. And you had plaintiffs' attorneys who basically settled cases to take the money and run on behalf of athletes who really didn't have, they didn't have the financial firepower and they didn't have the legal firepower behind them like the O'Bannon case did. This is kicking and screaming on behalf of the NCAA up until Charlie Baker. And I've got to give Charlie Baker, the new NCAA president, former governor of Massachusetts, a Republican in a Democratic state, understands politics. I think he's done an amazing job. And as somebody said to us for the book, Charlie's either going to be the best president in the history of the NCAA or the last president in the history of the NCAA, because he's doing everything he can. And I think he's sent a very clear message that the NCAA, and again, let's remember, it's a member association. You know, people say, wow, the NCAA should do this, but it's 3 separate divisions. It's 1,100 schools. So you have the most powerful schools in the SEC, the Georgias, the Alabamas, the Auburns, the Tennessees, which have a very different financial dynamic than a mid-American school like Central Michigan or a Sun Belt school, or even in the case of Louisville, you know, an ACC school, a powerful ACC school, but they're not the Big Ten and they're not the SEC. And there's a difference, as we are seeing now clearly in some of the potential proposals and policies that are being put forward by Commissioner Sankey of the SEC and Commissioner Petiti out of the Big Ten. So I think what the NCAA finds itself in is a very precarious position right now, where they have virtually begged Congress for help, antitrust exemption, some help in guardrails and guidelines for the portal and NIL. And as you well know, this particular Congress, you're not getting much done in terms of bipartisanship.
Right.
Now with Ted Cruz there, head of the Commerce Committee, there is some hope. But I think it's still, knowing what I know and what I've read, I think it's a long shot to think you're going to get any help out of Washington.
We'll be back in a minute. You're listening to On Track. Springtime is just around the corner, and it's not too soon to start planting your garden. Maybe you're wondering if your spot is sunny enough to support sweet peas, how to make your rosebuds abundant, or when to prune your poplar. Ask our master gardeners. Call or text 502-814-TALK. That's 502-814-8255 with your questions for On Track's Spring Gardening Show. You're listening to On Track, and with March Madness around the corner, we are checking in on the state of college sports with Emmy Award-winning sports journalist Armen Keteyian. So we talked about NIL agreements. Who is really benefiting from these NIL agreements?
Well, that's an interesting question, because certainly the student athletes, and I should say athlete students, because they're spending more time certainly in the major sports, college football, major college basketball, both men's and women's in basketball. They're spending more time on the court or in practice than they are in a classroom, I can tell you that. But they certainly, and rightfully so, because for decades they have been denied even a single dollar for their name, image, and likeness, their NIL or their marketing opportunities. So certainly, you have offensive linemen now who go into the portal that have started let's say they have in the course, they may be a junior or a senior to be, they may have 50 or 60 starts at a mid-major program. They're looking at $750,000 to go to a SEC or a Big Ten school that thinks it has a shot at getting into the 12 or soon to be 14 or maybe even 16 team playoff. Cornerbacks, wide receivers, certainly running backs, and quarterbacks are certainly the most precious kind of commodity right now. But there's also agents who have sprung up who really have no background whatsoever they're not certified or approved by the National Football League Players Association. They're not registered with anybody, but suddenly they're experts in NIL, and they're recruiting athletes and their families who have limited understanding of what it means to sign a contract. And in some of those words in those contracts, like perpetuity, meaning we own your NIL rights forever. Even if you go to the NFL, we still have a piece of your name, image, and likeness. So there's been a lot of bad things happening. Certainly, as I said, agents, people that are running collectives now. They just started a group a couple of weeks ago that was formed and founded by a former NCAA investigator, Tim Nevius, called Fair Sport. They're going to act as arbitrators in terms of NIL deals that either go bad or prior to a signing of an agreement, you arbitrate exactly what that contract says and what the responsibilities are for the athlete and for the collective and for the school. The rich have gotten richer. I mean, the media rights deals are enormous. Not only, I mean, the SEC numbers are approaching $60 million a year. The Big Ten numbers are equal or more than that. The ACC numbers are probably in the $30 million a year range. Then you add in the money that comes to the conferences and the schools if you make it into the college football playoffs, and that's above and beyond March Madness and what schools receive for that. I think the one thing that we saw, the two words, I guess I don't know if self-interest is one word or two words, but greed and self-interest, as John and I were reporting for The Price, those were the driving factors in decisions that were being made, certainly in the destruction of the Pac-12. And now you see, most recently, there were meetings in New Orleans between the Big Ten and the Big 12, athletic directors, football coaches, commissioners, and they're going to take. They're already talking about expanding the college football playoffs from 12 to as many as 16 teams. And it's not my language. Danny Wetzel, who's a great columnist for Yahoo Sports, said it's a solution in search of a problem. They don't have a problem. College football has never been more popular than it is right now. And despite some of the early issues with the college football playoffs, they were riveting in the end. The quarterfinal games, the semifinal games, and certainly even the championship game, it was great. And the numbers were what you would expect them to be for events like that. But right now, as you look into this kind of crystal ball, I don't see anything for the next 2 or 3 or 4 years where there are going to be problems solved. I still think we're in that Oppenheimer phase where things blow up. The O'Bannon, the House case, the Alston case were atomic bombs, and the collateral damage from those things are still being dealt with on a number of different levels.
So we're talking about all these different changes, NIL, and you alluded to the House case as well, which is like the NCAA recently agreeing to that $2.8 billion settlement, allowing schools to directly pay athletes up to around $20 million annually. With these two big changes, how do you see the impact and the competitive balance on the future of college basketball and other sports, and also you're seeing it sort of go towards a more professional model?
No question. It's professional sport. I was talking to Bill Belichick, as everyone knows by now, is the new head football coach at the University of North Carolina. And one of the questions I had for him was like, Bill, you're going to be dealing with 18 to 21-year-old kids. And he's like, Armin, those were rookies coming into the Patriots. I dealt with 18, 21-year-old kids, 21-year-olds, certainly. But he goes, this is professional sport right now. We're treating it as professional sport. And when I was coaching, and this is Bill's talking to me, when he was coaching in Cleveland, his salary cap was like $15 to $20 million for his roster. He goes, that's my current number here at North Carolina. So it's not all that different. It is professional sport. And I think the one thing that people, that really struck John and I for the price was, and there's a reason the book was called The Price. It wasn't just the financial implications involved. It was the emotional and the psychological and the physical toll that was being taken on everybody in major college basketball, major college football, and even you can look to the non-revenue sports. Certainly with the destruction of the Pac-12, now you have former Pac-12 schools in the ACC, and these non-revenue sports have to travel 3,000 miles to go play a baseball game or a tennis match or a field hockey game. And that's bonkers as far as I'm concerned. So I think what's really important here is to understand is that this sport, particularly, I think college basketball right now is more stable because you only need really 5 players, 6 players. So you can go out and buy a roster for about $5 million, like St. John's did when Rick Pitino came in. You can turn your roster over in 1 year. And a lot of these coaches know that, so they're going to go into the portal and they're going to get athletes who might be the best player in the Sun Belt or the best player in the Mid-American, and they're going to bring them into the ACC or they're going to bring them into the SEC, and they're going to star in those leagues. But it's chaos right now for these coaches to try to, knowing that every year you're not developing talent anymore. You're basically managing free agency every single year, and that's exhausting, and that's an unfortunate set of circumstances that are a result of the NCAA's reluctance to come to an agreement with its labor force, whether it was a unionized associate or an association or just, look, we're going to share the wealth, which they never really did. And what you see now is this landscape, this wild, wild west that I don't see any real quick solutions in sight.
Yeah, and I'm thinking about the schools now too. In this sense, like some of those bigger schools might have more advantageous athletes. When you think of University of Louisville kind of ranking in the middle, how do you think it will rank like this type of university compared to those top 10 or those bigger universities?
I think Louisville is a fascinating case because certainly they have a very strong support from their fans. How strong, it's all based on their collective and how much money can Coach Braum raise for football and how much money can they raise for basketball, because that's the game right now. Unfortunately, is the first questions out of athletes' mouths now, whether they're in the portal or they're high school athletes and they're being heavily recruited, it's not how am I going to be developed? It's not, do I have a chance to start next year? It's how much money can you pay me? What's the number? And that's unfortunate, but that's just the name of the game right now. In Louisville, I was thinking about it today, historic basketball program, 9-4 last year in football, really established themselves as a contender in the ACC. But, when you look at the ACC and you're looking at Miami and you're looking at Florida State, and you're looking at others, North Carolina, and you're saying, well, where does Louisville really rank there? They're kind of in the middle. And if you look to the future, and let's just say the Big Ten and the SEC decide to break away and form their own league, and how many of those Big Ten schools are going to make it? How many of the SEC schools are going to make it? How many out of the ACC are going to make it? How many out of the Big 12 are going to make it? Is it 32 teams? If it's 32, then, Louisville's looking at, are we in or are we out? If it's 64, I think, looking into the crystal ball, you say, yes, for sure, they're in. I worry about the mid schools, the Mid-American Conference, the Sun Belt, the American Athletic Conference. I think that's where the destruction is going to take place, or the reorganization of those conferences, because I don't think in any way, shape, or form, as a group of five, they're going to be able to really reap the rewards that are now so heavily falling in favor of the Big Ten and the SEC, and to a certain degree the ACC and the Big 12. I know a lot of people at Central Michigan, friends of mine that are there, and they're really trying to figure out who they are. Are they going to become a regional school? Because they no longer are going to be able to play these revenue games that they would play like Michigan, and they would get $1.5 million from Michigan to basically get throttled by Michigan at Ann Arbor. But that $1.5 million went a long way to paying down and paying for their football program. And they had 2 of those a year. So that was $3 million. They're already going to lose one of those games, those essentially those revenue games for them. So where do they find the $1.5 million? And where do they find the $20 million if they really, as part of the Judge Wilkins, if this case is settled in April, early April supposedly, right around the time you're looking at March Madness and the Final Four, do they have $20 million? No, they don't. And that's going to be a problem.
Armin, thank you so much for being here on Track. Thank you for your time.
Oh, you're welcome, Aisha. Thank you.
Armin Katayan is an Emmy Award-winning sports journalist and New York Times bestselling author and former contributor to Sports Illustrated, The Athletic, and CBS Sports. On Track is a production of Louisville Public Media. The On Track production team includes Michelle Tyreen Johnson, Jacob Munoz, Alex Biscardi, and Laura Ellis. If you're just tuning in and you want to hear the full show, you can find it now at LouisvilleOnTrack.org or in your favorite podcast app. And let's continue the conversation. Is there something you want to hear about? Something that matters to your Kentuckiana experience? Let us know by sending a text or giving us a call at 502-814-TALK or send an email to ontrack@lpm.org. I'm Aisha Jaffer, and remember, each day is a chance to make your own one shining moment. Until next time, you're on track with Louisville Public Media.